Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Real Life, Real English. And today we are joined by Chris from English Con. Chris, hello, Chris.
Hello, how are you doing?
Yeah, good. Thanks so much for joining the show and being part of this new project that we've got called Real Life, Real English, where we talk to English teachers about their passions and hobbies and things like that, and we break down the grammar and the vocab as we go. So we're going to be learning a bit about Chris and his teaching career, and a bit about himself, and then talking about his hobbies and passions. So let's get into it. Chris, what do people need to know about you? Obviously, English Con Chris tells me that there's a bit of Spanish in there.
That's right, yeah. So just very quickly, thank you very much for having me on. I'm very excited to be here. So English con Chris, a bit of Spanglish there, I know. I'm obviously from England, from Brighton originally.
Hmm.
But after university, I started my travels specifically in Spain and other Spanish-speaking countries. So yeah, I think I have that connection with the Spanish speakers learning English. Like I know their mistakes. I know why they make the mistakes. So that's the reason for the con, Chris. Yeah, the bit of the Spanglish is just to kind of emphasize that I have the English and Spanish languages to
Yeah.
help understand the common mistakes from students. I believe you live in Spain, right? Is it similar for you? You understand the common mistakes, why they're being made.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a benefit when you're a teacher and you're trying to learn a new language yourself and you're teaching people to learn a new language. You kind of connect with them because you see what they're going through and you understand the difficulties that they are experiencing. So what made you choose Spain?
Interesting. So I used to go on a lot of holidays with my family when I was younger, but the typical all-inclusive resort holidays, which maybe we can
Yeah.
speak about all-inclusive later. But the very typical, maybe I shouldn't say this word, but the giddy holidays, the
Yeah.
very typical English holidays in the south of Spain. And yeah, I love the food, obviously the weather. That's the stereotypical English thing to say is I love the Spanish weather, but it's true. And then the other half was I was lucky enough to meet a Spanish girl in Brighton. Um,
Okay.
so that was the second reason kind of came together and we decided to move to Madrid. And that's where it all began. Yeah, started to learn Spanish myself. Very difficult. So as you mentioned, I understand the frustration from all of you Spanish speakers learning English. Don't worry, I get it. Yeah, I get it.
And actually, so your videos are they're just focused for Spanish speakers, and you translate everything for your audience. And it's done in such a way that any level is able to understand every single one of your videos purely because you have the translations there. But what I've noticed with your Spanish is you speak Spanish with a very English accent, like
Yeah.
we say. We all suffer from the accents. However, your Spanish is so good. So, mine, for example, I learned Spanish through speaking. I didn't pick up a textbook or go to classes or anything. It was purely for integrating myself into society.
Yeah.
Whereas you've definitely learned the grammar when it comes to Spanish.
So no, I mean it may surprise you, but I also have never done. No, I tell a lie. Sorry, I have done a few classes.
Okay.
When I was an English teacher in an academy that also taught Spanish, it's very common. They offer the teachers free classes. So I think I did a few weeks, but as like yourself, I found it more useful just to be out in the world. I was very lucky that I had a Spanish girlfriend, so she
That
introduced
helps.
me to her Spanish group of friends. After Madrid, unfortunately, me and the girlfriend broke up. We're still friends, but yeah. Anyway, I digress. Sorry.
I digress.
Um, yeah. So I went to Mexico, and I was again very lucky, where I have one of my good friends from Brighton. We went to school together. He's half Mexican. So he was actually over there at the time visiting his dad. He
Uh-huh.
decided to live there and become Mexican national.
Wow.
Speaks amazing Spanish from a very young age because of his dad. So he's always been very good at Spanish. And so I was very lucky that when I went to Mexico, I was with him and his Mexican friends. So again, I was forced into the situation where I had to speak Spanish, and they were really patient with me. They were really good lads, really patient and helping me a lot. And that's how I learned the grammar, honestly, just from
Ah,
helping me, or maybe here when you, I don't know if this is the same for everyone, but when I learned more vocabulary, it helps me obviously understand more. That's obvious. But then when you understand more of the sentence, you understand more how the grammar works and how the
yes.
sentence structure works. On a very basic level, a beautiful house, a casa bonita, but you don't hear that until you understand it. And they, he said house first, and then he said beautiful. So that must be the grammar in Spanish. You say the adjectives after the noun instead of
Yeah.
before the noun, like in English. So just by learning vocabulary, I think it helped me to learn grammar because I was understanding more conversations and listening to the sentence structure.
I do. And so when you were talking then and your Mexican friends were correcting you, I was thinking of an expression that we can use there, and it's to pick someone up on.
Oh, yeah.
To pick someone up on their mistakes or to pick someone up on the grammar. It's a really cool phrasal verb to use with
Yeah.
that. So obviously learning a second language yourself and being fairly fluent in Spanish, what would be like the number one tip to give to people learning English that you feel helped you along your way to learning Spanish? Is there it's hard to say one sometimes, but
Yeah.
is there something that you think, oh, that really helped with my journey to learning Spanish?
Um, yeah, I would say again, maybe I kind of already mentioned it, but it's those social scenarios. And it's difficult because not everyone has that opportunity where they have a group of speakers who can help them with the language and just immerse yourself. There's language clubs which can help every city in Spain and even in London and England as well. There are language clubs where you can practice. But yeah, it was that situation, that scenario that really helped me. Tinder as well. Again,
Wow.
not in a kind of disgusting way, but just meeting people and forcing myself to speak Spanish, having drinks or eating dinner. Going to see a concert. Going on dates in Spanish. That really helped as well. Yeah. So it's just
Yeah.
immersing yourself as much as you can. I know it's difficult because you don't have English speaking friends, maybe, but then it's about just trying to find some. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that immersion is just key. And before the show, we were talking about obviously the benefits that the Spanish schools have now because a lot of English natives come to Spain for a year out, and they get experience by working in schools and doing
Yeah.
conversation classes with the students. And the effect that that has had on the students is absolutely insane. The level that these kids have now, just because they get an hour, 2 hours a week to speak to a native teacher who normally can't speak their own language. So
Yeah.
they really have to try and get their point across. I think it's a yeah number one tip. Just immerse
Yeah.
yourself in it, whether it's through apps like Tinder where you're messaging people and writing in the language,
Yeah.
or whether it's listening to podcasts on a daily basis as well. So before we move
Exactly.
on to real life, real English, you picked yourself up on it as well. You said, I digress.
Yeah.
Quickly explain to everyone because that's a really cool expression that we have in English. I digress. How would you
Yeah.
explain it to someone?
This is one of my favorite words because I always digress. To digress, yeah, when you're trying to explain one thing, but then you maybe accidentally, normally accidentally, you start talking about something else completely different. I always tell my students, if you imagine a road, a vocal road, and then you digress is just you turn. Basically, so, I digress. I'm going to stop talking about this new thing I've started talking about, and I'm going to go back to the original thing that I was talking about, the important thing. I always get distracted and I start talking about different things. So it's a really good verb to say, I'm not talking about what I should be talking about. I
Yeah.
digress. I come back to what I was talking about. I love that verb. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a cool expression, and we can also say like I'm getting off topic. I'm talking about something completely different to what we should be talking about.
Yeah.
Let's get back on topic. So we've got off topic and on topic as well. And I know a lot of my students could use that a lot because they start to talk to me about their weekend and then they're telling me about gossip at their school and it's completely different to what they should be talking about.
Yeah.
So yeah, I digress. It's a very, very good expression. And I'm going to tell my teenagers to start using that one.
Yeah.
So let's move on then to real life, real English. So before the show, you said you wanted to talk about travel, movies, and series. Let's start with travel because you've mentioned obviously Madrid and now you're in Gijón and you mentioned Mexico. So you've obviously traveled a fair bit. Tell us a bit about where you've traveled and your adventures.
Yeah, first of all, I want to say sorry if those are quite boring. Maybe all the listeners are like, "Oh, travel series and movies." Oh, but obviously, I love them, and also I think they're all really good for learning a language. So I thought it'd be a really good few topics to talk about. So the
Mhm.
travel, basically, in England, as you know, we have something called a gap year. So to quickly explain to any listeners who might not know what a gap year is, it's very similar to in Spain an Erasmus, but instead of being part of your kind of university studies. And I know that Spanish people don't study on Erasmus, even though they're supposed to. I know they don't. But gap year is different, where, for example, I applied to university and I got my spot at the university, but a year in advance, meaning I had my place fixed, but I had a year to do whatever I wanted. In England, we call this a gap year. So on my gap year, I went to Australia and I traveled Australia for 6 months, working in
Wow.
bars, working in farms, and just traveling, enjoying my life before doing another 3 years of education. And then I caught the travel bug, which is something I definitely want us to mention later because I
Yeah.
love that expression. I caught the travel bug and I decided that after university, I was going to leave England and just keep traveling. So finished university. As I mentioned, I went to Madrid. No, tell a lie. Sorry, I tell a lie. I went to Canada first to snowboard for 6 months, which was great. But that's not really related to the English, so I'm going to jump ahead. So yeah, Madrid, where obviously I began my Spanish journey. Then Mexico for 2 years, Mexico City, which I love Mexico, the food, the people. I love Spain, I love Madrid as well, but the food in Mexico was amazing. And then after 2 years of that, I decided I wanted a bit of a change. So I went to China, Beijing,
Wow.
and I lived in Beijing for about 3 or 4 months, not very long, but I had a really good kind of 3, 4 month experience in Beijing. Then I turned 29, 30, and I decided that I should stop living around the world and come back to a country where I can see myself settling down, which is another great phrasal verb, to spend the rest of my life, to settle down. So Spain, obviously, I love Spain. It's in Europe, so it's close to England, so I can fly home, see my family. And then in Spain, I've kind of drifted from Bilbao. I was living in Bilbao for 6 years. I was living in Barcelona for a few months, in Alicante for a few months, and
Wow.
I'm currently in Gijón. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So sorry for the long-winded, another great adjective, the long-winded story of my trip, but that's been my journey. Yeah, lots of Spanish-speaking countries, which again is why I think traveling was such an important topic to talk about, because it's such a great way to learn a language, especially to learn English,
Yeah.
because anywhere in the world traveling, you're learning and speaking English.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so true. And you've just made me realize why I absolutely love doing this podcast because literally in a 3 minute conversation there or you explaining your travel history, there was so many things that we can talk about and the audience, you guys that are listening at home or watching, are going to get some fantastic vocabulary and expressions and things like that. So I'm going to go back and talk about the quick notes that I made when you were talking then, but then I have questions because you've been everywhere. So let's start with caught the bug.
Yeah.
Um, when do we use caught the bug for something? Now, Chris actually said caught the travel bug. How would you explain that?
So the way I would explain it is that when people think of the word bug, they immediately think of the well, insect. I know it's not
Yeah,
an insect, but they think of insects, beetles,
yeah,
these kinds of
bichos.
things. Yeah, exactly. Whereas I think in Spanish as well, the word bicho, but in English, the word bug can also talk about a disease. For example, a
Yeah,
stomach bug, which is similar to just a virus that you've caught and then you give it to someone else. I mean, hopefully not, but that's what normally happens. So that kind of bug is the important bug, very similar to a software bug as well.
yeah,
This is the bug we need to focus on because if you think of again, my example, the travel bug, it's a sickness that I have or that I have caught, which means I need to travel. Obviously, it's an idiomatic expression, obviously, because it's not a real sickness, but it's a great way to describe when you have this addiction to something. I've
there it
caught the
is.
travel
Yeah.
bug, I've caught the football bug.
Yeah, yeah. It's an addiction to something. When you're so passionate about something, you can't stop doing it. You've caught the bug. So I've caught the running bug. I
Yeah.
love to go out and run, the gym bug, etc. And obviously Chris caught the travel bug, which is really cool. And then you were talking about, I think it was Australia. And then you said you went somewhere else, and then you said, "Oh, actually, I'm jumping ahead. I'm jumping ahead of myself." Um, it's quite easy to translate jump ahead to go ahead. But instead of using go ahead, he's used jump. And in English, we use these, well, how can I explain them? They're very animatic words to talk about mundane things like, let me go ahead part. And in one of our podcasts, we had Jack, and he was talking about mountain biking. And he said, I chuck my bike into the car. And instead of like, I put my bike in the car, he said, I chuck my bike in the car. And it just makes it more animated. I'm putting my bike in the car, but in an animated way. Like you said, let me jump ahead again.
Yeah,
Instead of let me just go back to where I was or yeah. So
definitely.
jump ahead was a really cool thing. And then another one you said was settling down. You were getting to 29, 30 years old. Your parents are telling you to settle down.
Yeah.
Um, how would you explain that to the audience?
So the first thing I would say, obviously, it's a phrasal verb. If any listeners don't understand what that means, don't worry. But they're very, very common in English, where it's a verb and a preposition. The settle is the verb, down the preposition. This phrasal verb specifically is, as you mentioned, 29, 30. It's to have the intention of staying in one place forever. I say have the intention because obviously anything could happen. The future can hold any possibility, but we have the intention. It's normally, not always, but it's normally if you get a fantastic job or that's not remote working is important to mention.
Hmm.
Maybe you buy a house or you buy a flat, maybe you get married and start a family. These kind of decisions where it makes your life more difficult to change city, like at the drop of a hat. Sorry, more expressions at the drop of a hat. um, yeah, settle down is that the intention to stay. I don't know how you would say it in Spanish, asentarse, like just be settled and comfortable, maybe in
Yeah.
one spot for the rest of your life.
Yeah, to kind of build a base for yourself and become,
Perfect.
yeah, like you said, comfortable is a very good word. You find a house that you're comfortable in, you find a job that you're comfortable in, you find a partner that you're comfortable with. Um, so you don't have the craziness of right, I'm off to Japan, I'm off to China, I'm
Yeah,
off to here. It's yeah, you're more settled. And
exactly.
a lot of times I go into classes and the students are in there before I get there and they're quite noisy or rowdy. That's a good word as well to use to explain it. So rowdy when people are really noisy and animated. And I go into the class and I'm like, children, settle down, like calm down. And again, that comes
Yes.
back to the become comfortable and calm and live an easy life. That's the
Yeah.
that's the plan. And then you said you drifted from place to place. Instead of you went from place to place, you said drifted. Um, why drifted to explain that? It's a really cool verb.
Well, I think again, talking about what you mentioned a second ago, it's these animated words. Obviously, yeah, it's just obviously drift would mean to move without any real kind of plan. Like, yeah, obviously
Yes.
you have some plans. I want to go to Gijón. Now I want to go to Bilbao. Like, you have some plans, but again, it's more open. It's more just kind of drifting from place to place. But really, there, the reason I used it, as you mentioned, is just it makes the sentence a lot more interesting than saying I moved or I went from this place to this place. No, I drifted around Spain.
Yeah, really, really great expression. And then another one I wrote down, you said that was a long-winded story. Long-winded. To people listening, if you said long, obviously they understand that if something is long, it's largo in Spanish. And winded, they might not fully understand the full context of the word because you got wind. But winded is obviously when you have the air taken out of you is to be winded. But long-winded means something completely different. So
Yeah.
how would you explain that?
I have no idea where the origin of this phrase is. Yeah, probably, as you mentioned, from winded, the having the air taken out of your body, because long winded would be my explanation. Too much talking long. Yeah, I'm very, very commonly, I do give long winded explanations because I talk too much sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, it made me think then when you were explaining it that maybe it came from somewhere like where we talk and talk and talk and talk and talk until we're out of breath.
That's what I'm
And then we
thinking.
take
Yeah.
that breath. So it's long-winded because you're using all of that wind or air that's in your lungs to talk, and then you come up for air and
I think
yeah,
might be, yeah. Obviously, it's very specific to explanations. You can use it in some other contexts, but yeah, it's very specifically used with explanations. A long-winded explanation, yeah.
yeah. When something goes on for a long period of time. And then the last one you said was drop of a hat. I
uh,
love expressions like this because I can just imagine the literal drop of a hat. So, like, I take my hat and I drop it,
yeah.
and people that are learning English are going to be thinking that we're crazy to have these sort of explanations, these expressions. So, a drop of a hat, how would you explain that?
Very basically, I would say immediately. At the drop of a hat is immediately with no real kind of plan, just to go for it. What I find really interesting is that, yeah, this expression that we're now speaking about was part of the questions about previous expressions. And it just goes to show what I tell my students is that these idioms, these expressions, they are important. They're not just fun English for an exam. No, we use them more commonly than a normal verb. Like I would say, at the drop of a hat is more natural for me than to say immediately, for example. I don't know if it's the same for you,
Yeah,
but
yeah, it is 100%. And one thing again, what I'm really enjoying about doing this podcast is that there's so many tips that we've got for the listeners who are learning English, but also for other teachers. There's little gems that we're getting from people, and obviously, teaching these expressions is something that we have to think about doing. So in our academy, for example, we always do a question of the day to start the lesson. It's a question of the day and it's a dictation, and they have to write the question. They get a minute to write their answer. But once they get to like a B1, B2 level, what we start to introduce is phrasal verb or idiom of the day. So I give them a sentence with the idiom or the phrasal verb in it. They write it as a dictation, and then they have to then write their own sentence using that structure or that phrasal verb or the idiom, etc. But obviously, we explain what it means as well. So any teachers that are listening as well, I think it's a really, really important thing to do is to be teaching these phrasal verbs and idioms almost on a daily basis to your students because they don't all come up in the typical books that they're reading at school, the textbooks, etc. So that was
and
really
then
cool.
if
Let's Go on.
If I could quickly mention on that point, I think, yeah, I 100% agree with you. I also think it's very interesting that you need to be careful as teachers, because some idioms, and I have a fantastic example, which is raining cats and dogs, which for anyone that doesn't know, this just means raining a lot. Raining cats and dogs means raining a lot. This is what I tell my students is an exam idiom, because it comes up in the Cambridge exams, but I have never used this expression in my life personally. My mum has. So again, I'm not saying this is the same for everyone. Maybe teachers disagree with me. Maybe some people do use this phrase. But I personally, I do love teaching these idioms and phrasal verbs, but I always try and focus on the ones that I'm using. I very rarely use ChatGPT for idioms and phrasal verbs. Maybe for some other ideas, I might use ChatGPT to help me with my Instagram videos, but idioms and phrasal verbs, no. Which ones am I using? Which ones
Yeah.
are being used on the Big Bang Theory when I'm watching Netflix or Stranger Things? So if that's a great one to teach. So yeah, I would definitely say stick to the ones that are common, because there are some idioms which are great for exams, but not necessarily that common in English. If I don't know if that's something you agree with.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Obviously, we like to try and teach some that are not in the Cambridge books, but the ones that are in the Cambridge books, you're going to see them in the
Yeah.
Cambridge exams. That's the ones that they're going to use. And luckily, Cambridge and companies like that, exam boards like that, they've got so many materials and resources that they can give to us and to the students to tell us what to expect in
Yeah.
the exams. Yeah. Um, Talking about or you said something that you hear in the Big Bang Theory. That's a really good segue to move us on to your next topic. Now, a segue, if I said segue to my students, they probably think of the electric scooter things that are called
I was
segways.
gonna, yeah.
But a segue is like a connection to move us on to another thing. So it's a good segue to move us on to talking about series. Now, anyone that hasn't seen Chris's videos yet, he explains lots of expressions, and then at the end or during his videos, he inputs some videos from series, from movies, and things like that, where people are using those expressions in real life. And it's a great way to see how people use the expression or the phrasal verb or the grammar that he's actually teaching. So it's a really cool style. So anyone that hasn't subscribed to Chris's channel yet, definitely go and check him out, because you can see one, you can see his style of teaching. And Chris is very much like me. He's very animated,
Yeah.
talks very firmly, very clearly, and then to have these real life examples as well with lots of different accents is just a great tool to have to learn English. So let's talk about series and movies and how you obviously bring them into your classroom. But what do you enjoy about movies and series and things? Is there a topic that you want to talk about there?
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's an addiction. I think it might be that I just, I think it's an interesting cultural difference I've noticed from Spain and England, that Spanish people love spending their free time out on the streets, even on a Monday to Thursday after work, it's on the street. Whereas England, probably because of the weather, Monday
Yeah,
to Thursday, it's more common to maybe go home. Dinner time is 6 p.m. and then you watch TV. So I think maybe it's a cultural thing that I have, grown up like that. The weekends is socializing, but Monday to Thursday is normally dinner, TV, homework, bed, or something like that. And so I think maybe that's kind of ingrained in my personality. But it's just I find them really funny, the sitcoms specifically, The Office, Parks and Recreation. And the reason I wanted us to talk about this was because of how useful it is to learn English. And the reason I chose specifically sitcoms, which are situational comedies like Big Bang Theory, Friends, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, The Office, all of these 20-minute episodes, funny. For any listeners, the sitcom, situational comedy, is because the comedy comes from the situation. Ross
yeah.
saying Rachel's name at the wedding. That's where the comedy comes from. Anyway, I digress, as we remember. Sorry. So yeah, so for Spanish students, Spanish speakers learning English, I definitely recommend sitcoms because it's modern English. Watching The Office or Brooklyn Nine-Nine, it's different to watching a film. Whereas a movie, maybe depending on the movie, might be more similar to a book where it's very advanced vocabulary because it needs to be descriptive. It needs to, like I said, be animated, really get the viewer's attention. Whereas sitcoms are more focused on social English. So, for people looking for that kind of English, wanting to know how to have conversations in English, I think sitcoms are brilliant. I do understand that comedy is one of the hardest things to understand in a second language. I do understand that. But just the actual English itself is brilliant for vocabulary, expressions in social situations. And yeah, I love them. I always have them on in the background. Even if I'm doing
Yeah,
something else, I'll have The Office on in the background. Yeah.
that's a very British thing as well, I think, is the TV on in the background. Definitely, yeah, whichever house I went to in the UK, the TV was always there. It was on in the background, whether it's a sitcom or something. And one great thing you mentioned about sitcoms is they are 20 to 30 minutes long. And when you're learning a new language, to concentrate on something for 20 to 30 minutes, it's like going to the gym,
Yeah.
you are tired after 20 to 30 minutes of running on the treadmill. You're tired, and your brain is going to be tired after watching 20 to 30 minutes of a series, but properly watching it.
Yeah.
The great thing about watching a series is you can kind of understand the context of it because of body language and intonation and things like that. However, if you properly watch it and you're listening and trying to understand the words and, right, what was that word? I didn't understand that word. Let's quickly note it down. Um, that then does take up some serious brain power.
Yeah.
And it is a great tool to have, 20 to 30 minutes of, I call it actively watching a program is a brilliant, brilliant way of learning English. So you mentioned The Big Bang Theory, and Friends and things like that. Are there any series that you think is a must for people to watch, that are learning English, or is it find something that suits your personality?
I would say I think it's find something that suits your personality. However, if you work in an office, I would definitely recommend The Office.
Sure.
And I know that sounds obvious, but the reason I say this is because not the jokes, because maybe some of the jokes, no, you shouldn't say that in your real office. That's important to mention. But the normal conversation is fantastic for anyone who works in an office. They talk about clients, they talk about the paper orders, the deliveries, the commissions. So many really good words. There's a sales department, an HR department, an accounting department. So I think it's a fantastic sitcom. For I mean, it's also hilarious, but yeah,
Yes.
but it's also specifically very good for anyone working in an office because of that vocabulary, office vocabulary. But yeah, for anyone not in an office, I think it's just find your style, find what you like, and then you'll learn vocabulary related to something that you enjoy.
Yeah. And one other thing about The Office is it's probably the best series. This is the British Office, not the American one.
Oh, okay,
It's
so this is a
probably,
debate.
yeah, it's probably the best series to watch to learn about British humor, like that dry humor, which nobody understands unless you're British. I've tried to use some of the sarcasm with my wife and her family who are Spanish, and they look at me as if I'm like being really serious.
Yeah,
But it's sarcasm, and they just don't understand it. So when I meet with my friends from the UK and things, and I can use that British sarcasm again, oh, it's so much fun. I
yeah.
love that type of humor.
I
I
always
have
ex-
one mate.
no, no, sorry, go on, go ahead, sorry.
So one of my mates who lives in America, and he said the American humor is completely different to the British humor. So whenever we talk, we're so sarcastic and dry with our humor to each other, and it's great fun. It's, yes, you can learn a
Yeah.
lot from the British office.
That's what I wanted to mention. Sorry, was the word dry. I think that's a perfect description of the British humour. And when my friends or students ask me to describe it, it's very difficult to describe. But
You
I give
can't.
the example of maybe, again, not being stereotypical, but maybe an American would say, "Oh, it's raining outside today. I should put on my suntan lotion," like that. Whereas a British person would say, "Oh, it's raining today. Have we got any suntan lotion?" Like very serious. That would be dry, just kind of very. Oh, anyone got any suntan lotion? It's raining outside, and what? Like that's how I would explain dry humor. Yeah, as you mentioned, very British.
It's exactly that. It's almost trying to trick the person that you're trying to joke into answering your question,
Yeah,
and then going, "Oh, I'm an idiot. I am
yeah,
so stupid. Why did I fall for that?" One of the great ones that my mate did when we were driving in the UK once. We were driving past an IKEA, and it was like a new IKEA or IKEA for the Spanish.
yeah,
And it was a new IKEA that was built, and they had all these flags and the massive IKEA sign. And I was driving at the time, and my mate just went, "I heard they're building an IKEA here somewhere. Do you know where it is?" And I went, "Yeah, it's over there." And he just looked at me and went,
yeah.
"And really?"
That's a
And
fantastic example. I'm going to use that in the future. I'm going to steal that story and use that to explain to my students. That's perfect.
and there's a good expression as well where you fall for something. So if someone like tries to play a trick on you and you fall for it, it means that you took the bait, another expression, and you fell for their trick. You were a victim to their
Yeah.
trick. So that's yeah, really cool. And obviously, with people learning English as a second language, if they're taking an exam, one of the most common exam questions is about movies or series or TV programs. And it normally comes from like the review section in the writing, for example, where they have to write a review on a film that they saw. And if we're talking about films and series and things like that, and we're talking about a review, what sort of vocabulary do you think we could give to the audience that could help with their writing, for example?
My biggest advice for anyone, sorry, my biggest piece of advice, sorry, for anyone writing a review, especially for the Cambridge exams, is what we've mentioned a couple of times today, is this animated vocabulary. A very good example would be to read Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, where there's about 5 pages describing trees. So if you can describe trees in 5 pages, you can find 3 synonyms for the word you want to use. And that's my biggest piece of advice is just don't use the verb that you're thinking of. Use a different one. Use a synonym because that's stories. You can't use just good English. You need to use good descriptive English and very animated English. So synonyms, I would say, is my biggest piece of advice is synonyms. Try and learn as many as you can. Extreme adjectives, instead of saying very hot, use boiling. These extreme adjectives, we call them in English. I think it's so essential for these reviews because you need to be descriptive. I think that's the key word, descriptive.
Yeah, when you look at the marking scales for all of these exams, whether it's Cambridge, Language Cert, Trinity, on the top scale of the speaking, the writing, they all say candidate shows a wide range of, and then you've got grammar, vocabulary, etc. Sometimes they specify the type of grammar and vocab that they want. One of them is cohesive devices, so your linkers and things like that. And they specify that on some of the grades. So when Chris was saying then about, find synonyms to use, make sure not if you think you've used a synonym and you're like, oh, I've used a synonym, I'm going to use that same synonym again. Don't. You can use that original verb once, then show the examiner that you have a synonym for that same word, and then you have an expression to explain the same thing as well. And one really great way when you're writing a review about a movie or a series of sorts is your adjectives and adverbs. They really, really help sell the scene. and sell what you're trying to describe to the examiner. It makes it more easy to read, easy to digest. It makes it flow a lot more. So just think before, like Chris, the example he said about a tree, there's only so many adjectives you can use to describe a tree. However, use adjectives to describe a tree. It's not just a tree, it's a lone tree in a field. Lone is another uncommon word. It's alone, and
Yeah.
then lone, it's lonely, it's on its own.
Like the Lone Ranger, the very famous Western, the Lone Ranger. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also think when you're writing about something, think what the topic is. So we're talking about reviews for a series or movie. Think of all that vocabulary that you learned when you were studying that unit in the book. We have episodes, we have series, we have the actors, the main character,
The
and
plot
all of
twist.
that. Yes, cliffhangers. Um, all of this vocab, try and show as much as you can in your writing and in your speaking. Now, one really interesting exam thing. We're an exam center for language cert. I was explaining to you before we spoke, and the speaking exam, part four, is a monologue, and you get given a topic, and you have to talk about that topic on your
Yeah.
own for 2, 3, 4 minutes, depending on the level that you are taking. And it can be, right, you have to talk about the last film that you saw, and you have to talk for 2 minutes about this thing. And the same applies here when you're talking. However, one thing you will notice if you go and watch Chris's videos, but also you will notice it today if you're watching the podcast on YouTube or wherever, that Chris uses his voice and he pauses and he uses the intonation a lot, and he's very clear when he pronounces things that are important. He pronounces all of the syllables. When you're doing a presentation or your exam, use your voice to help you. It's not. There's an expression. I don't know if you can help me here, Chris, if I forget it. It's not the words that you say, it's how you say them. Is that
Perfect.
the
Yeah. I was worried then because I don't know what expression he's talking about. But then as soon as you said it, yeah, it clicked. Yeah.
And it's so true. You can have a lower range of vocabulary, but the way that you present yourself is so much better than someone with all of the vocabulary but no emotion. You will probably still get more points.
Yeah, confidence.
Um,
I think confidence is a massive thing, even in social English, but definitely in the exam, but also just in social English. In my opinion, personally, it's better to be confident and make some mistakes than to be. This is more social English, sorry, not exam English, but social English. Yeah, better to be confident with a few mistakes than to speak perfect English, but be very nervous and take forever to say it, in my opinion.
yeah, yeah, 100% agree with you there. And that's in your native language
Yeah,
as well as your second language. It's definitely a social hack there to
yeah.
that confidence when you talk. Okay, let's talk because we've spoken about series. We've given a recommendation, which is the Office, and I think that is a great recommendation, the British Office for everyone to watch. Let's quickly talk about movies. Are there any movies that you've recently watched or that you would recommend for the audience to watch?
So actually, I was going to do the opposite and actually say some movies I wouldn't recommend
Okay.
specifically for English, because one of them, unfortunately, is my favorite movie of all time, which is Lord of the Rings. However, what I wanted to mention about movies are a great way to learn English, but similar to series, it's important to choose the correct movie. For example, Lord of the Rings, we do not say my fair maiden in English anymore. You know, she's my fair maiden, or oh, my lonely gentle soul. We don't use this English anymore. So even though the film is amazing, it's not great for the English immersion. So my those are my recommendations of what not to do. These fantasy film, but really like historical dramas, any historical dramas where even Second World War kind of films, we don't speak like that anymore. The language has changed a lot in the
Yeah.
last 80 years. So then my recommendations would be the more modern films. I think action films would be my biggest recommendation. because no offense to any action movie directors like Michael Bay, but I don't think the plot, the storyline, the plot is not that complicated normally. So it's easier just to focus on the English, enjoy the car chases, enjoy the shooting scenes, but without a very difficult plot to understand. I think it's very easy to follow what's happening in English and also hopefully learn some normal vocabulary as well. Whereas, yeah, if you watch a World War II drama, you might learn a phrase that actually is not common in modern English.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And they are, so some of my friends, my Spanish friends here that were learning English, they said that they started watching films in the original language, so in English, and then when they went back to watch it and it was dubbed, they find it really difficult to watch the dubbed version now, just because of the quality of the lips are moving completely different to the sound that's coming out. Although they didn't fully understand the movies, they just found it more entertaining,
Yeah,
and they could focus for longer if they were watching it in the original voice. And movies are a great way of immersing yourself in the language. You're training that ear because, again, you're not going to concentrate for 2 hours. It's
yeah,
not going to happen. That you're going to switch off. You're going to get distracted. But you are listening to English. It's there in the background for 2 hours. And that is a really, really powerful tool to have. Just listening to this podcast we're 46 minutes in now. Like what you're doing to your brain by just absorbing the sounds that we're saying, even if you're not understanding everything we're saying, it has a benefit. And it's like going to the gym and doing bicep curls. You're not going to notice massive biceps after one session in the gym. It's going to be 6 months, 12 months of solid repetition.
yeah,
So I think movies, they are definitely a tool to learn English. And try to actively listen while you're watching. Try to
yeah,
understand everything that you can, but don't be scared just to relax and watch it. And the action films, like you said, the plot's super easy to follow.
yeah,
You're not going to get lost. You know exactly who is who, and then you can just passively listen and enjoy it at the same time. Do you
yeah.
have any tools that you would recommend for people when they're watching a film instead of just watching a film? Should they be doing something else?
I mean, kind of what every English teacher would say, which would be in the original version with subtitles if you find that it helps you. But some people then get distracted and they're only reading and they're not enjoying the film. Even me sometimes in English, I remember Squid Games. I remember I was reading the subtitles more than watching what was happening.
Yeah,
But again, that is the best option. Yeah, other than yeah, I think you're right. It's impossible. You are going to drift out of and then drift back in again. So I think it's just keeping that on, not giving up. Even as you mentioned, even if you drift out, as long as it's still on in English, don't give up and be like, oh, I'm going to change it to Spanish. No, don't do that, make that mistake. Sorry. I say my biggest piece of advice, we've mentioned traveling and films and series. My biggest piece of advice in all of this would be something that you enjoy at the end of the day. Because anything you don't enjoy, if you do it in English, it feels like you're at school. It feels like you're studying. And no, you do classes for that. If you do it again in your free time, it's not going to be enjoyable and you'll end up hating the language and not wanting to
yeah,
study. So always focus on things that you enjoy. So at least then, even though it's in English, it doesn't feel like school. It doesn't feel like it's necessarily you're studying. No, you're doing something you enjoy in a second language. Video games is a great example. If any listeners like playing video games, change the FIFA commentary to English. You're still playing FIFA, the game's exactly the same, but just subconsciously you're listening to this commentary in English. And yeah, as Anthony mentioned, you will automatically subconsciously learn certain phrases or sentence structure. So that's my
yeah,
number one advice, is stick to things that interest you, because otherwise it will feel like studying.
yeah, yeah. We had, I think it was one of the first episodes, it could have been the second or third episode that we did, and we had a teacher called Aurelia on the show, and she spoke about journaling. and the importance of just writing in obviously your mother tongue, but also in a second language. It can really help. So a thing that we were speaking about was when you watch a series or something in your second language, quickly get your journal, your notebook, and just 5 or 6 bullet points of what happened. So this is what happened. This is what happened. Here was the plot twist, and then at the end, this happened, and that will really help you not only with your writing, but also with following a series and following the storyline. Because you'll find yourself as you're watching it, you'll be like, right, this happened. I'll make sure to write that afterwards. This happened. I'll make sure to jot that down. There's another really cool expression to jot something
Yeah.
down, to take a note of something. And it really helps. And all of a sudden, you're turning this activity that can be just you sit down and chill and watch a film, but you're actually making it educational now. And you've just taken that little step to enhance your learning and to speed up your learning process.
Yeah.
And I think that's super important with anything that you can do in the second language. Try not to just do the minimum, just do something above. Take that little leap. So after intercambio, when you go and meet a load of people, write down the names of the people you meet and the jobs that they have, or something that you found out about them, or repeat it back to them. So you're practicing the speaking as well, and it's just taking that extra step above your normal learning. So yeah. So what we're going to do, I'm going to quickly promote your socials, Chris, because I think everyone that is trying to learn English and has a bit of free time and is enjoying the social media and the sort of short, bite-sized videos. Chris's are just completely different. One, because his animation when he's speaking, his emotion when he's speaking, he speaks extremely clearly in English, is definitely a selling point, and it's a great accent to hear as well. And then secondly, if you're a Spanish speaker, he has everything explained in Spanish. And his videos reminded me of the Cambridge grammar in use books for
Yeah.
Spanish speakers, because you have all the questions in English and then underneath a Spanish explanation. And it's one of those books where you can self-teach yourself. So Chris does it really well. And then he brings in real life situations as well by having sitcoms and clips from movies and things at the end or during to show you the different accents of people using the grammar in use. So his Instagram is English Con Chris, TikTok as well, English Con Chris, and then YouTube, English Con Chris. You said at the moment you're more active on Instagram and TikTok, yes?
That's correct. I also just quickly thank you very much for your kind words. Yeah, really, I really appreciate it. Thank you very
No
much.
problem.
But yes, Instagram is the main one at the moment. But just like yourself, I'm hoping to start making longer form videos to kind of focus more on YouTube. As you mentioned, yeah, the Instagram and TikTok, very bite-sized videos, and I hope people like them if you do watch them. But in the future, yeah, I am going to prepare some kind of longer form mini classes. I don't know how long exactly, but yeah, something different for the YouTube. So yeah, thank you very much again for your kind words.
No problem. And at the end of each episode, I always ask the guest to recommend either another Instagrammer or another teacher. And what we do is we tag them in the show notes, and we hope that they would like to come onto the show and share some of their passions and hobbies and things like that as well. So, do you have anyone in mind that you would like to recommend or for us to ask to come onto the show?
Yeah, so this was a very difficult question when you asked me before the show, because one of the things I love about this community is that there's no competition between any of us. There's so much demand for English learning that all of the teachers that I've met have been so collaborative and so amazing. So I've got a long list, but I'm going to start with a friend of mine, Paul, with the Instagram handle I study with Paul, all in English. I study with Paul. Yeah, really good lad. Another guy from England, very passionate about teaching. So yeah, that's who I would like to pass the mic to. But I would like to mention there was a long list of people I wanted. I could have given you 10 or 15 or 20, to be honest.
Well, I've enjoyed this project so much, and like everyone that I've spoken to just brings something completely different to the table because we all have completely different personalities and likes and dislikes and things. Are you still there?
Oh,
Oh,
yeah, sorry, yeah.
yeah, this is the first episode we've done where we're talking about films series. Travel, I think, is a natural thing. Anyone that loves languages loves travel. For some reason, that just goes hand in hand. So I'd love to be able to get guests back on in the future and we talk about something else because two English teachers together talking about things and breaking down the grammar and the vocab is just priceless for the end user, the ones that are listening.
Yeah, I completely agree, and I really hope that our conversation today was interesting for the other viewers. Maybe my life's a bit boring. I'm sorry, but I hope it was interesting. And as you mentioned, I really hope that the students, the listeners, were really able to gain some cool expressions, the settle down, the at the drop of a hat. I digress. Yeah, I really hope these are useful for anyone listening.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for listening. And we will catch you all again in another episode of Real Life, Real English.
So thank you
Catch
again.
you later.